My name is Woodrow Wilkins, and like a lot of you, I was born at a very early age. But unlike a lot of you, I didn't know what my name was until I was about 9 or 10 years old. I was born at home, as everyone was back in those days, 81 years ago. I was born at home about halfway between Howe and Heavener, Oklahoma. The doctor, Dr. Dean, came out to the house, and I remember my aunt telling me that they sent her and her brother, my uncle, outside while I was being born. And at that time they would dig a pit in the ground, and they would put a layer of corn husks. Then on top of the corn husks they would put a layer of potatoes, then a layer of corn husks, a layer of turnips, or a layer of corn, and they would layer that stuff up into a mound, and that would keep all winter long until spring. And then of course we picked wild berries and canned those, and that lasted us all winter also. So we had food storage without refrigeration, without ice boxes, and without electricity. When Doctor came to the house and I was born, very early in the morning, he asked what they wanted to name me. And my dad said Woodrow because that was his name. And about the same time, my mom said Joe. Well, he said, well, get together. And so they got together and talked it over and compromised and called me Joe. So shortly after that, I guess as I was growing up, we'd jump ahead all the way to World War II. That started in 1941, as everyone knows, and my dad went into the military, and my mother left the farm and moved to the city, Tulsa, Oklahoma, to work in what they called defense plants at that time, an aircraft plant, and then eventually sent for me, and I moved up there. I was about 8 years old or 9 then. So when we went up there to a big city, they had to have a birth certificate. And when they went to get the birth certificate and looked at it, my name was not Joe, it was Woodrow. So that caused some confusion, but all of my legal papers now are Woodrow. After the war was over, my dad, when he got out of the service, he came to Bakersfield, California, and eventually sent for my mom. She came out. I went back and stayed with my grandmother for quite some time, months, and then eventually when school was out, I followed them out to Bakersfield, California. I went to high school in Bakersfield. My sport was baseball, and I was quite good at it, played on the varsity for 4 years. So 1953, when I got out of high school, the Korean War was going on. So a friend and I we played baseball together, we decided to go in the military service together. So I volunteered for the draft, and they took us to Fresno, California for our physical. And for some reason or another, they held me over. In the military, they do everything by alphabetical order. Well, my last name is Wilkins. So I don't know if that contributed or what, but at any rate, they kept me overnight, and my buddy Kenny went on to Fort Ord for training, and I followed the next day. But he went in the 20th Infantry Regiment, and I went in the 63rd Infantry Regiment. So the buddy system fell apart, and I didn't see him again for 2 years. So much for joining together. I guess that the North Koreans must have heard that there was a Choctaw warrior that was training and coming over. So they signed a ceasefire before I finished basic training. And fortunate for me, they recut orders for 300 of us, and I got to go to Germany instead of Korea. My buddy who went on ahead of me, he went to Korea. But I spent the rest of my time in the military service in what they called the Occupation Army of Germany. It was only 7 years after World War II, so most of Germany was still in rubble, but it was a wonderful time for me, 18 years old, and So I spent about a year and a half there, most of it in what they call 29th Tank Battalion in the 2nd Armored Division. Then when I came home from the military, I went to work driving trucks, basically. After, you know, all young people coming home from the military, it's hard to find jobs. You have no experience except for shooting people. So I found a job driving trucks, and I drove those for almost 20 years. A lot of it was tankers, and I hauled out of a specific refinery here in Bakersfield, Tosco. So I rolled in there one day to load, and 2 people had quit their jobs there and were going into the police force. So they asked me if I would fill out an application for the refinery. I filled one out and they signed it, and a week later they hired me in the refinery. So I changed from truck driving to refinery operations. I worked there until 1984. At that time they closed that refinery, and I went to work for Chevron in their production. And after 2 years here in Bakersfield, an opening at a plant on the coast of California opened up, and we transferred over there and started that plant up, and I worked there and ran that, ran what they call the cogens. I made all the electricity and ran the desal. We made all of our own water with a desalinization plant. I ran that, and 1999 I retired and settled down to do my favorite thing, and that's to go fishing. Here in California, I'm not particularly fond of the politics, but I love the geography. We have something called the Sierra Nevadas here, which actually runs all the way from Mexico to Alaska, but it's really beautiful here in California. So we fish. A friend of mine and his son, we've been going up in the Sierras for 20 years now, a couple of times a year, to spend a week each time fishing. We go up in the snow, and we go up in the rain, and we go up in the sleet, and we go up in the sunshine. But that's one of my greatest hobbies, I guess, is fishing. I skied quite a bit up until a couple of years ago when God stopped the snow in California. So we haven't had much snow lately, and I may give up skiing and just concentrate on my fishing skills. So that's my time up until now, and I would say that God has blessed my life. It hasn't been a spectacular life as far as the world would maybe look at it, but it has been an absolutely blessed life for me, and I thank the Lord who blessed me with that. So, you know, I loved those people, and they seemed to love us. I am sure there was a faction of them that were bitter about it, but for the most part, I don't know how Hitler misled those people so much. They are just wonderful people. For the most part, I think that those of us, for instance, sitting here, we don't want to go to war. It's leaders and despots. It's people who want more land, money, power, whatever that might be. Those are the ones who lead us into war. Mostly we want to go earn a living, raise a family, come home, and just live our lives out. Wars are started by powers that are above just what I would call a common man. So I would say that probably one of the most important things that a young person would seek is to not accept the mantle or the title of a victim. Once you become a victim, you cannot be a victor. If you become a victim, then you shift all of the responsibility to someone else. It's not your fault, it's this person's fault or that person's fault. But if you accept responsibility for your own actions, because once you become a victim, you can be controlled and you can be manipulated. So avoid becoming a victim, be a victor.